Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating. We're going to look at how early 17th century Puritanism and a massive, dramatic rebellion against it literally built the cultural DNA of modern America. Seriously, it's wild to see how the debates, the intense anxieties, and the triumphs of these early colonists are still echoing in the exact ways we live, work, and govern ourselves right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, we'll look at wealth and decline. Second, their cultural legacy. Third, we'll hit the core theology. And finally, number 4, the radical Roger Williams. We're going to trace this incredible journey from the immense power of the early Puritans to their eventual fracture.
All right, section 1, wealth and decline. There's a really fascinating paradox right at the heart of the Puritan decline. To start us off, let's look at this ultimate chicken or egg question. Which died first, their religious zeal or their frugality? You see, the very first generations of Puritans lived by a strict, this-worldly asceticism. They were incredibly disciplined, right? Living not for themselves, but totally for God and their community. And well, because they were so fiercely frugal, they actually ended up making a ton of money accidentally. So the big question is, did this incredible wealth eventually kill their religious zeal, or did they lose that religious fervor first and then just start spending all that money on themselves? You can actually see this shift crystal clear when you look at the different generations. Those early Puritans, they poured absolutely every cent they made right back into their businesses and their super simple, plain churches. But fast forward to the third, fourth, and fifth generations, and things start looking very different. Instead of reinvesting everything in the community, they started building these massive, lavish homes on places like Chestnut Street in Salem. The intense, self-denying zeal of the founders had, kind of slowly faded into everyday comfort. Moving on to section 2, cultural legacy. Let's look at the secular, societal impact. Even as their strict religious fervor started to decline, their broader impact on society was honestly just getting started. So many modern American norms that we just totally take for granted were largely birthed by this exact religious movement. They established a profound respect for lawful government. Think of the Mayflower Compact, where citizens willingly ordered themselves into a community bound by contract. They completely ingrained the famous American work ethic by valuing useful, hard work as a virtue. They prioritized civic participation. And maybe most interestingly, they seeded the whole concept of American exceptionalism. That's the idea that the nation has a special, divinely guided mission to the world. And sure, modern versions of American exceptionalism usually drop the religious foundation, but the blueprint, that comes straight from the Puritans. Another massive cultural pillar we have to talk about is their intense concern for education. They absolutely did not want an ignorant populace. And this immense drive led directly to the creation of Harvard University in 1636. That is just a few years after the huge Puritan migration started. And it was literally kickstarted because a guy named John Harvard donated his own personal library to get it going. And this brilliantly illustrates how the Puritan legacy evolved over time. Today, if you buy a Harvard sweatshirt, it just says Veritas, right? Which means truth. But that was not the original motto. Back in 1636, the motto was Veritas in Christo et Ecclesiam, meaning truth in Christ and in the church. Centuries later, as the school shifted to a much more Unitarian and secular perspective, they completely dropped the religious aspect, leaving us with just that single word, Veritas. All right, section 3, core theology. Because you really can't understand these cultural impacts without understanding the intense theology driving them. Let's break down the 4 pillars of their theology. First and foremost, the absolute belief that God made the world and God rules the world. Everything in it is His. And what that means on a practical level is that every single station in life is uniquely ordained by God. So idleness or slothfulness, that wasn't just considered a bad habit. It was literally a sin against the Creator who assigned you your work in the first place. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it completely busts a major myth about historical church structures. Look, in the medieval Catholic world, there was a very strict hierarchy of holiness. You had monks and nuns at the top, then priests, and way, way down at the bottom were the regular lay people. Well, the Puritans, following the Protestant Reformation, completely flattened that out. They believed all callings were equally worthy. A housewife raising children or a laborer working in a muddy field was doing work completely equal to a minister preaching in a pulpit. You glorified God just by rolling up your sleeves and doing your specific vocation well. But as you might guess, this intense focus on God's absolute rule led to some pretty terrifying anxiety. It was rooted in John Calvin's doctrine of double predestination.
Basically, the Puritans believed that before the world even began, God inscrutably elected some people to be saved and elected others to damnation. His ways were totally mysterious. So the ultimate burning question in every Puritan's mind was, how do you actually know you're saved?
The answer they came up with was assurance. Now, let's be super clear here. Good works did not earn you salvation. Salvation was entirely God's choice. But your good works, your absolute diligence in your vocation, and your dedication to the church were crucial evidence. They were a sign or an assurance that you were in fact one of the chosen. So if you were sitting on a backless wooden bench listening to a 3-hour sermon and genuinely loving it, well, that was seen as an excellent sign that God had elected you. This brings us to the third pillar, the absolute transcendence and majesty of God. The Puritans believed God was so high and so powerful that any attempt to depict him with human art was incredibly offensive. Take Boston's Old South Meeting House, for example. You won't see statues, you won't see stained glass, you won't even see a cross. They embraced extreme simplicity in their worship spaces, basically because they felt elaborate art would only bring down the majesty of a truly transcendent God. And the fourth pillar was the priesthood of all believers. Now, this didn't mean everyone just got to stand up and preach. Preaching was still a very specific vocation. But it did mean that regular, everyday people were responsible for counseling, caring for, and praying for each other. You didn't need a priestly office to mediate your relationship with God or to minister to your neighbor. And honestly, this massively elevated the importance and power of the laity, becoming a really foundational aspect of American Christianity.
Let's move to Section 4. And see how this builds into the major twist, Roger Williams. So right into this incredibly rigid, tightly controlled system walks a radical rebel who just shatters the mold entirely. Enter Roger Williams. Williams was a brilliant guy who clashed terribly with the Puritan leadership in Boston. He was totally horrified by the fact that the state restricted voting rights only to male congregational church members. He believed in absolute religious freedom. He argued you shouldn't have to belong to a specific church or any church at all to be a full member of the community. After some really severe confrontations, he actually had to flee south into the wilderness, and he eventually founded Providence, Rhode Island, as a sanctuary for total religious freedom. So the crucial point is why Williams insisted on the separation of church and state. Today, we usually think of the separation as a way to protect the government from being influenced by religion, right? But Williams instituted it for the exact opposite reason. Given his European background, he was absolutely terrified of the state controlling, running, and ultimately corrupting the church. He wanted a firm wall of separation to keep the church pure from any government interference. And Williams' own spiritual journey? It was incredibly restless and wild. He started out as an Anglican back in England, became a Puritan in Massachusetts, and then moved to Rhode Island, where he actually helped build America's very first Baptist church in 1639. But get this, he was only a Baptist for about 3 weeks. He eventually left that too to become a seeker, completely unattached to any denomination. Nearing the end of his life, he was so utterly convinced of the strict purity required for the true church that he believed only he and his wife were true Christians, and eventually, he even started to doubt her. It's just an amazing history, isn't it? I mean, from strict wealth-generating frugality to a flat hierarchy of work, all the way to Roger Williams's radical demand for religious liberty. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to really think about. Look at your own life right now. Which of your daily habits, your attitude toward your job, your civic duties, or your political views on religious freedom are actually just the ghosts of 17th century Puritans or the echoes of Roger Williams' Great Rebellion? Think about that and keep exploring.